start by introducing a bit on our cooperation. I stand here today as a member of UNStudio, but representing our kind of really communal effort between Orion Capital Management and UNStudio in delivering this project. A project that, as said before, is in London, in Islington, 22,000 square meters, 31-story high building. And I will allow Aref and his colleague Britta Harper to do a kind of brief introduction on the way that the client team has been cooperating together and their experiences in the process.
We'd like to start by apologizing for not being there in person. We would have loved to be there. Unfortunately, timing could not permit us to do so, especially the fact that I was born in Chicago, so actually I would have loved to be there personally. But anyway, this is the next best thing, and I want to thank you for listening to us. I'd start by saying, what was the starting process for us at Orion Capital Management? How we got involved? We basically inherited this site in the depth of the crisis in London, and the idea was to design a tower. We already had a permit we did not really like. The permit really showed more of an office building rather than a residential tower, and we thought lacked character. So we ran an architectural competition, and we ran an international architectural competition, and UNStudios with Ben Van Berkel won that competition hands down. And I remember to this day why Ben won it, for several reasons. The first, Ben basically drew an organic tower, and I remember what he said to me. He said, if you own a residential apartment in that building and be standing on the pavement, you'd be able to point to exactly where you live, and you'd be able to get that through the number of balconies, the number of ears, we call them, throughout the buildings. And I like that. I like that organic architecture and the ability for people to be able to point to their habitat, to know where they're living. The second reason was that actually Ben designed a tower that you can actually had balconies for every apartment. Every apartment has an outside space, and I thought that was so important, as London has such bad weather, as you all know, and the fact that when there's a ray of sun you could step out was so important. The site is on a basin, a water basin that's linked to the Regent's Canal, and the curves of his building had a strong linkage to the waterfront, and we loved that. And so for those three reasons, I think Ben was the one for architect to choose for. We then, of course, had to fight for his design, and so we went to the council with our two designs, the office-like tower and Ben's design. And even though they tried to stop us because of using excuses for pigeons, we were well armed. We had our pigeon experts, and we were able to convince them that pigeons couldn't actually create nests within our tower. And we won that evening, and we got the council to support us for the new permit.
We had so many meetings, and the amount of times we looked at materials, we looked at samples, we had big slabs of the GFRC, we had big aluminium panels, and it was hard choosing the colors and the textures for the buildings together.
We also worked with Ben to create more space at the top. The original design had very much a triangular shape. We were able to close that off and make that into a more rectangular top rather than a triangular top. That helped a lot in terms of value.
The other impressive thing about the UNStudio team is that obviously they design things that are very small. They sometimes also design furniture. I think Ben has designed shoes. And if you have that much attention to detail, to be able to design the small things and take care of the detailing on something small, if you then scale that up for a whole building, the result is just very, very impressive, because they literally translated that passion for the small things into a whole building, including its facade, but also including the amenities themselves.
And then we worked a lot also on the interior designs and the structure. I'm an old structural engineer. My master's was in high-rise design, and I worked for Les Robertson, a famous structural engineer, for many years. And that actually helped me push the team to remove most of the columns. So we were able to create a column-free base, which allowed for great views from the apartments. Ben was very good in framing these views for every individual apartments with great views of the City of London.
Throughout the design process, the teams obviously spent a lot of time together. And I remember our weekly meetings, they were either here in London or sometimes also we went out to Amsterdam to spend time in the UNStudio office. And that's really where we got into a lot of the detail. It was the detail around the apartments, how the apartments work. It always helps to have more people around the table to have these discussions. It's practical discussions. How do you use your space? How do you want to live?
Orion's approach to the design has always been that great design can create great value. That's not necessarily taken into account by many developers or investors. And our philosophy is that good architecture does not necessarily cost more, but actually spending time on the architecture of your building allows you to create long-term value for the users as well as for the investors in the asset. When we looked at the site, we realized that it was part of a master plan of 3 towers. And in order to lead by example, really, the fact that we used one of the best architects in the world has actually influenced a lot the environment and has kind of forced the next plots of lands on which the other 2 towers were developed to use equally very good architectural firm. So we've created part of a city which was up and coming by leading with great architecture. We've kind of led the architecture of that whole location along the basin of City Road. Some people call it Starchitect City. That's really our lead in sort of choosing UNStudios has forced the next investors / developers to equally use great architecture. So we're very proud in having influenced that environment of that part of London by choosing the right step to start those developments with.
Canaletto was a project where all the ingredients came together, the financial, the commercial, and the design. And to achieve this, we had a lot of workshops, and it is critical in those situations that we all work together. For example, we made a decision to remove some of the floors in the building to achieve better ceiling heights, because for us, we wanted to create apartments that we could sell, that people wanted to live in.
I'd like to end by telling you what was the most rewarding part for Orion. And that was the fact that today we can step into that tower. We can go to the club on the 24th floor, we can go to the spa, the cinema room, the billiards room, the TV room, the pool. And I love to see the occupiers enjoying themselves. The fact that they're using these amenities and fun with their families is the utmost reward for us. And for us, we've designed a tower that meets occupiers' needs, it meets the city's environmental needs, and has created a landmark in London of which we're very proud. And thank you for listening to us.
So that was the kind of big narrative behind the development of Canaletto. And allow me to kind of bring you forward in these steps by zooming back a bit and explaining how it all kind of came together. So as the location already was clarified in Islington, really on the border of the city, Hackney, Shoreditch, it's all kind of areas that were strongly developing after the kind of starting point at the Silicon Roundabout kind of started to give reason for developing. We were introduced to the scheme following up on the already existing planning scheme. What Aref already mentioned, this almost office-like structure was our starting point. This is the envelope, this is the planning permit, and what do you need to do? We need to get the 190 units in, give that height there, and try to see how we can maximize the residential quality of that tower. What we then like to do is see how we can define the different ways that people look at those buildings. What is important when you are in your own apartment? We think that's all about framing. These artworks by Joe Alberts show the way that by bringing contrasting colors, by playing with the ways that squares are placed into each other, you can create certain tensions. We find that a very exciting strategy to apply also onto the buildings. So what we then devised was a similar kind of framing and clustering throughout a building by introducing these big facade bands that also helped us to contextualize it to the already existing Victorian neighborhoods. So where these bands, natural stone, were infilled with brick, these bands that we introduced on the Canaletto building are inlaid with a GFRC lining. And the kind of combining of two materials, so the metal outside frame with this GRC lining, is the thing that Britta referred to also already as the kind of eye for detail on all the different scale components that we work with. So it's about how those two come together, and in our case, introducing the concrete as the kind of soft liner that, that is attached to the people's residence, to the balconies, and gives it a more livable quality. So these different bands had different types of representation in the building, depending on the different types of apartments, ranging from studios to 4 to 5 bedrooms and a penthouse. There's different balcony typologies, a Juliet or a big outdoor living space, or the big cocoon in the ear that's on the outside of the building. So that helped us to transform that kind of introverted building to something that has a much more residential and a kind of livable entity. But to get that done, the big focus was on how do you get those ears to be truly detailed in the proper way. We had to get these prototypes made on a one-to-one before anything could be placed on the building. So this is one of the examples where we spent months of trying to adjust the different bits of detailing in getting these ribbons and seams correctly. These were elements that should be fitted on the building in as large as possible sections to also limit the transport hindrance that's there on City Road. There's no stopping. There can only be stopped in a couple of side streets, which we want to prevent. So every bit of the facade had to be, as quickly as possible, hoisted onto the facade, where the post-tension slab construction allowed for the kind of maximized floor height. These different ribbons also have a couple of extra qualities. As Aref said, there was a bit of a question on wooden pigeons like to nest in between all these little folds. By creating the proper curves and kind of angles, pigeons would, according to our ornithologist that was brought on board, not be tempted to nest in these different angles. By also placing them on the correct heights, the maximum sun would be allowed into the apartment during the winter times, but it would be reflected off the building during the warmer summer times. So looking at the building in the different build-up, we've got a plinth and a basement for the amenities. Then a series of standard apartments, after which we step the building back and slim it down to create a more premium offer of apartments, literally crowned by a penthouse. In this section, you can also see that the floor height was indeed increased on the top to create a higher floor level, after which the other apartments fill the rest of the tower. So the basement amenities were also provided by natural daylight. This is done by creating a generous light well that goes 2 stories down to create an underground pool area, which is kind of fully lit by the light from the light well. But before you get there, there's the larger outdoor space. This outdoor space is kept open and is designed as part of the public domain. A big green wall and a water feature with some seats also add to the quality of that outside domain. And the big canopy makes sure that it's an attractive and also protected area before you step into the lobby. So these elements are semi-private public areas where everybody can come, walk through, and kind of the speed of City Road is reduced a bit. The amenity space, the small restaurant areas on the ground floor, also have terrace spaces that were introduced on City Road. The UNStudio design is then also pulled into the different amenity spaces to get this full idea of arriving home. It's the canopy that is pulled into the foyer, and the design is completed into all the little letterbox details that you see there behind the reception desk. This is a view of that two-story down pool, where the light well brings all the light, and we would allow the people that are kind of floating in the pool to have the most kind of interesting view as they were floating into their underground pool. Further amenities are the cinema room, a gym on the other levels. The different apartments, as I said, we slimmed down the floor plan, so we've got the typical floor plan here on the left side and the reduced floor plan on the right, where the ones on the left have a mix of the smaller studios, which have a full apartment-wide folding doors, and the apartments on the right plan have the full balconies folding around to be able to walk around on the outside of your apartment. There's a couple of these shots that see that you, by extending that outdoor space, it doesn't have to be a 5-meter, 4-meter deep balcony to enjoy those views and to make the apartment user already celebrate those outside conditions, which can, on the 29th floor, be quite challenging in London. One of the extra things there is to try to reduce those columns in those views. So we've got our air structure in the far center, but then we have a column-free space that allows that maximized view between the different ribbons. And it's that air that, although it kind of wraps around, then focuses and frames the user's views of London. You see the different bands. That's that one thinner band that was initially thought as GRC, but in the process has been adjusted to a metal extrusion. With the proper color matching, it's almost indeterminable if it's GRC or aluminium. The big penthouse then is crowned off by this big truss that is tied back into the structure, framing it even more for people that can celebrate their 180-degree views. This apartment here shows how the balcony shape is pulled inwards, and with the big folding doors creates that larger extension of the living room. So thank you.